Good morning and welcome to today's launch event on the use of social media in the library. I'd like to thank you all first for attending. I'd also like to thank in advance our panellists and Graham Walton for chairing the discussion later. And also, if you'll forgive me, also I'd like to thank my team for all the hard work that they've done in putting this together and for the presentations that they're about to give in a moment. Social media is a fascinating subject generally. I think it's fascinating in particular for publishers because social media, of course, makes publishers of all of us. It's a truism that there's been a vast explosion in the amount of information which is available for us all to consume, but there's also been a massive revolution in our ability to publish information ourselves. And this blending and blurring of roles, turning everybody into a publisher, is fascinating for us as publishers, fascinating for librarians and social scientists alike. The blending and blurring of the social and professional, of course, is very well documented. So here's my ideas on the legal environment for text and data mining in one tweet. Here's what I had for breakfast in the next tweet. We're all aware and familiar of that blending and blurring. And these are very young technologies and very young phenomena. We all seem to be living through a social science experiment conducted on a global scale with cultural icons that are still in their infancy. The launch date of Facebook was, anybody? 2004, 10 years old. I've got a 10-year-old at home, and he's unruly and rebellious. He's also inspiring and amusing, and I love him to bits. But he's got an awful lot of growing up to do, and he's got an awful lot of potential which is as yet unfulfilled. Facebook, 2004, Twitter, 2006, Pinterest, 2010. These are unruly children. We don't yet know how to interact with them properly. We're all learning, we're all experimenting, and to some extent we're all experts. Nobody in this room has got more than a decade's experience of working with social media, so we're all experts and we're all learning at the same time. Much has been written about the millennial generation, my 10-year-old at home and my teenager at home. Much has been written about children becoming adults prematurely as a result of social media. I'm interested in things going the other way as well. I think as much as there is a phenomenon of a distinct millennial generation emerging, there's also been a collapsing of the generations as a result of social media. So certainly in my house, you get the children listening to The Clash, and you get the adults listening to Lady Gaga in a way that you wouldn't have had in any previous generation. Adults playing games, children becoming exposed to adult cultural issues at a much earlier age. Again, it's blending and blurring. So fascinating then to discuss social media in a broader context, and particularly interesting to look at how it's emerging in the library. And this blending and blurring is so unconscious that perhaps we don't often realise it, and it kind of sneaks up on us. So look, here we are today. We're a publisher, and yet we're behaving as a researcher. This is social science research that we, as a publisher, have commissioned and helped to work with the library community to conduct. So publishers becoming researchers, librarians becoming publishers. It's all a blend and a blur. And I hope that today is going to be an interesting way in exploring some of those boundaries and kicking off a conversation. So without further ado, I shall hand over to Will Frass and Jodie Bell to present on the white paper itself. Thank you.
So Will and I will be taking you through some of the highlights from the white paper findings. We'll be drawing out key points and sharing some of our most interesting discoveries that we've made with you. I'll first provide a little context for the research that we undertook and explain a bit further about why we decided to create the white paper in the first place and how we went about collecting the extensive data which has informed the whole project overall. I'll then pass over to Will, who will share a bit more of the detail of the findings with you. probably the most important question to begin with is why look at social media in the library? Social media has the potential to facilitate much closer relationships between libraries and their customers. It enables them to overcome geographic barriers and make contact with their users wherever they are and however they're choosing to access library services. So it's clear that social media holds many opportunities for libraries, but also coming with that are many challenges. Current usage of social media remains ad hoc and at somewhat an experimental stage, but the use of social media tools is accelerating, and it's likely that they're going to play an increasingly important role in library service provision in the future. So it's against this backdrop that Taylor and Francis have decided to undertake the research and compilation of a white paper in order to provide an overview of current practices from which individual institutions can benchmark their own activities and be inspired to start and try new approaches. So how did we go about conducting all the research? Well, the project was a truly international one in its scope, and it was conducted through a number of different channels. Overall, there were well over 600 librarians who contributed to the research from around the world. It comprised of focus groups, which we held with librarians in the UK, the US and India. The ones in the UK and the US were facilitated by librarians, and in India by TNF staff. We held 10 telephone interviews with thought leaders from the library community, and these individuals came from the US, the UK, Canada and Switzerland. Then we held a Twitter party, which involved us inviting followers of our Twitter account to join us for an hour-long discussion so that they could share with us their experiences of using social media. And at this party, there were 73 registrants, all from around the world, and it resulted in 260 mentions, which for an hour-long discussion gives you some idea of how active that was. After the party had finished, we created something called a story file, which is pictured here, which enabled us to record the online conversation that we held, and this can be viewed online still. In the first week after this went online, it received over 1,000 views alone. We conducted an online survey, which received 497 responses from librarians around the world, and I'll go on to the profiles of those librarians in a moment. Finally, we carried out some follow-up desk research to reference other studies of relevant literature as well. When we had respondents to our survey, we asked them to share a bit more information about their backgrounds so that we can incorporate that information into our analysis. So, as I said, there were 497 responses all in all to the survey. And if you can make out the figures here, the majority by far came from the US. We have 182 respondents from that country. And this was followed by the UK with 50. And then we have some wider representation across Europe, Asia and South America. So although this doesn't give us enough of a representative sample to draw any conclusions about different approaches to social media on a per country basis, the qualitative feedback that we received from the 3 focus groups we held in the US, UK and India pointed to some similarities between the US and the UK in terms of how they're approaching social media and to what extent it's being used. And then the differences then compared with India, where there's a lot of interest in the potential of social media and how it can be used as a communication tool in the library, but there's perhaps less practical use at present. So in terms of institution type, the majority of responses came from librarians working in academic libraries, although we have some representation from other sectors such as the public and professional spheres. We then asked librarians to identify their job title so that we could see if there were any conclusions we could draw about how they were using social media depending on their role within the library. We grouped the 32 different job titles we received into the 6 categories you can see here: the library administration, training and education roles, collections, acquisitions, e-resources and subscription management roles, communication roles, digital information and service roles, and technical support. So we've run extensive analysis to determine if a particular library role could be associated with certain types of social media activity. However, when you have a chance to look at the published data, you'll see there's actually very few correlations between a given role and an individual or library's approach to social media. So this might lead us to believe that rather than being attached to a specific job level or role within the library, it's being picked up by individuals who have a specific interest or a talent for it. Interestingly, the data also showed us that there are a number of roles in the library which are now dedicated to specifically communications and social media. 10 respondents identified themselves as a social media manager, 7 as an outreach or communications librarian, and 1 person identified themselves as head of marketing. Finally, we also looked at audience size. So the majority of respondents worked in smaller libraries, with less than 5,000 full-time equivalent students. However, as you can see here, there was also a sizable majority which were using social media to reach much larger audiences of in excess of 25,000. So really we would need to conduct further analysis here to see if there was any correlation between audience size and that influence on how and why social media accounts are set up and managed. So I'll now pass over to my colleague Will, who will share a bit more information with you about the key findings of the research.
Thank you, Jodie. My name is Will Frost and I work in the research department at Taylor Francis. Part of the work that we do in our research department involves collection and analysis of survey data, both to inform decision making and hopefully spark some debates in events like this. The survey results I'm going to present today have been part of this wider programme that Jodie's just alluded to, like the focus groups, the Twitter parties, and the telephone interviews that we did, which have ultimately fed into the white paper. I've only got a short time with you this morning, so I'm going to focus on the top level results, so it's important to stay focused, not lose the big picture, and hopefully be a bit more informative than this individual here. So I'm going to start off looking at the questions from the survey that deal with aspects of the current reality in the library today, focusing on social media, then move on at the end and look at the future direction we might go in. The aim here is to work our way around the slide. I'm going to focus on each of these topics in turn and build up a bit of a picture of the current reality. I'm going to begin in the top left with the survey's basic opening question about the importance of social media. We asked our librarians how important the use of social media was on a scale of 1 to 10. And about 1 in every 10 said this was 10 out of 10, extremely important. It's a dark green bar on the far left. Another 10% gave it 9 out of 10. So overall, if we add up all those in green who are leaning towards the important end of the scale, we're encompassing just over 70% of librarians. What I could also do is look at how well entrenched social media is in the library. Nearly half of librarians said that they've been using social media for 3 to 5 years. If I add in those saying more than 5 years, we're just over 60%. So it seems that most librarians have been using social media for a number of years, and they think it's got an important role to play. So as we return to the main slide, I'm going to summarise the findings here and build up a bit of a picture. We also asked librarians how many social media accounts they had. Just over a third had 1 to 2 accounts, just under a third had 3 or 4 accounts. Now these could be multiple accounts on the same platform to deal with different aspects of what the library does, or 1 account on each of several different channels. And I'm going to come back and look at the channels used a bit later on. But now I want to look at how often librarians post on social media. We gave librarians quite a range of options here, hopefully covering all the different possibilities, and there was quite a spread of results. Most librarians are in the last 3 time brackets somewhere, so that's somewhere between a couple times a week to more than once a day. Now, bearing in mind what I showed you just now on the blue bars, with around a third of them saying they've got 3 or 4 different accounts, these posts might well be spread across different channels. In fact, it might actually be the same message repeated 3 or 4 times on different platforms. So I'm going to summarise that by just picking out the 2 most popular responses back on my main slide here. Now I'm going to look at the response to questions related to 2 key aspects of managing social media accounts in the library. Firstly, how many people are involved in managing social media in the library? Again, there's quite a spread of results here. There's no overwhelming, overarching pattern. Around 20% say 5 or more. It's likely that all the staff in a large library like that are posting content onto social media sites. At the other end of the scale, another 20% or so are saying it's all done by 1 person. I've actually drilled down into these data and split it out by the job role, and most of those saying 1 person manages it are either head librarians or reference librarians, and they may well be the solo librarian at that department or that institution. We also found that over a quarter have already implemented a social media policy in their library. A further 30% said they plan to do so in the future. But what's interesting really here is this grey segment, 42%, currently saying they take a totally ad hoc approach. There's no planning at all in how they go about using social media. So we're thinking this probably reflects the experimental stage many librarians are still at with social media generally. They're still rolling it out and they're still learning how they can get the best from it. They haven't necessarily decided on the best policy. So I can just about squeeze all that onto my summary slide before we move on to the final two topics in the bottom right. I've laid that corner out very deliberately, and I'm going to start by looking at the different channels that librarians said they've been using. Well, firstly, by far and away the most popular social media site is Facebook. 1 in 5 said they use this all the time, the green bars on the left. Adding in those who gave it 9 or 8 out of 10, we're almost encompassing half librarians. In second place, Twitter's less popular. Already we have nearly twice the number saying they've not used it at all compared to Facebook. That's the dark red bars on the right. Blogging in third place. However, if we start to scan our eyes further down that slide, you can see just what a strong third place that is, really. Looking at the other options, we can see there are 60, 70, 80% of the people in our survey, at least, saying that they never use these social media platforms. So there are 3 fairly interesting observations that we can make here. Despite its popularity amongst librarians, increasingly students have been saying that they're not using Facebook as much as they used to. Their parents are getting on Facebook, so they're getting off. And librarians in our focus group suggested users are starting to prefer more visual, less text-based media. Someone said in the white paper, there's a quote, students are searching by image first, looking at things more visually. Yet Flickr, Instagram, Pinterest, those ones further down the slide, haven't really broken through. They haven't taken off yet. And finally, I'd like to draw your attention to the small grey bars on the far right. We also gave librarians another sort of 11th box to say, we're not using this, but we plan to start doing this in the future. The fact that all the grey bars are pretty much the same size suggests that, again, we're at that experimental stage with those. There's no winner yet to emerge. There's no one we can point to as being the next big thing. So back to our summary, with the top 4 social media sites in circles at the bottom. The final piece of the jigsaw on this slide are librarians' objectives when using social media. The 4 most important objectives are these: promoting events, services, resources, as well as using it as a customer feedback tool. What I can do now is show you the intersection of these objectives with each of our 4 key channels. The number at each intersection there is the percentage of librarians in the survey who use that channel for that purpose. What I can do is sort of colour this in, apply a bit of a heat map. So green is high, green is good, it's big, red is small, it's low. And makes it easier to see straight away that Twitter and Facebook are really heavily used for promoting events and promoting services. But unlike some other walks of life, perhaps, social media hasn't quite taken off as a customer feedback tool amongst the librarians in our survey, at least. Just under 4 in 10 said they use Twitter for customer feedback. And even Facebook, which is generally popular elsewhere, just under 60% in this grid. So in the time that remains, we can look at the answers that librarians gave to 2 key questions about the future, as well as the challenges and opportunities that social media presents. First, will social media become more important in tomorrow's library? Well, there's a pretty resounding yes to that question. And second, will we see more roles dedicated to social media in the library? Again, quite a big majority think that we will. When it comes to the opportunities that social media is presenting in the library, well, nearly 3/4 said it gives them the chance to raise the profile of their library. Nearly 2/3 said it gives them the ability to connect directly with their users and the patrons of the library without that formality of going through the bureaucracy of the central university comms. And collaborating with different departments was another benefit that was highlighted. So to the surprise of no one, lack of time is of course a top challenge that librarians said they were facing with social media. So on my final slide, I've used the space to look at some of the slightly less obvious challenges. Striking the right tone or getting the balance right, finding the right level of formality. It's quite tough sometimes. Close behind that is making sure library users know your social media accounts exist, and making sure that as a librarian, you know about the latest trends in social media yourself. Responding straight away is also a concern for about half of librarians. One based in India told us, there's so many posts and because of other commitments, I'm not able to reply as fast as I'd like to. So dealing with negative feedback is also a worry for some librarians. There's only so much we can learn looking at all these stats and figures, so I'm going to hand back to Jodie now to provide a bit of richer context from some of our focus groups. So for now, I'd like to thank you all very much for your attention.
So, the opinions amongst librarians as to where social media will head in the future are quite varied. And you can see here some examples of some of the comments that we received throughout our focus groups that librarians offered about how they feel social media will develop, which might give some indication of what the future may bring. Some of the ideas that librarians suggested in our focus groups included the need for the library to be more strategic, integrating their social media platforms more closely with other existing systems within the library. There were also several mentions of the changing demands of customers who are becoming increasingly tech-savvy and well-connected online, and with perhaps a growing expectation of immediate response times, as Will touched on. So while some feel that social media is a more transient communication method, the majority seem to believe that social media will form an increasingly central part of the librarian's role and become an everyday part of communication with end users in the future. We see the white paper as being just a start to the research and the discussion. As well as being in print, it's available online in its entirety, along with the full data behind the research, a copy of the survey which was sent out, and also further analysis by individual librarian role. We plan to build a central web-based resource on social media for the library community to provide ongoing updates, in-depth case studies, and best practice guides. We hope that this will become a valuable developing resource that librarians can benefit from and continue to contribute to, so that the sharing of ideas and experience can continue. I'm afraid we don't have time for a Q&A session now, but please do come and speak to any of the TNF staff during the lunch and poster session later on. We'd be really interested to hear your thoughts about the research, and also if you wanted to share any of your own experiences with using social media as well. So thank you very much for listening. We'll move on to the panel session now, so I'd like to invite the panellists to come and take a seat over here.
Morning, everybody. My name's Graham Walton from Loughborough University, and I've been asked to chair this morning's session. And just on behalf of the library community, can I say thank you to Taylor Francis for doing this research for us. And I think it's a good example of how our partnership work can develop. Before we start, could I just take a snapshot, please? Right? So, won't be a second. Okay, can everybody smile and wave? Wave. At the back, the cameramen as well, please. Thank you. Thank you. Now, I did that as an introduction to our session because, for me, that summarises what social media is about. It's fun. It's free. You don't need particularly sophisticated technology. And it's a really rich communication. Immediately, we've generated content, which is both visual and text. And I can send that to my kids, and they'll say, now I understand what you do, Dad. I've never known until now. So it's great, but I'm very much aware. Is that confidential? Snapchats say that those images go after 10 seconds. If you read the paper in the past few weeks, I'm not sure about that one. And I haven't actually asked your permission to do that. I've taken your picture, and I didn't ask you. Now, if you don't want me to send that to my kids, have words with me afterwards, and that can be arranged. And also, I've made a contribution to information overload. That's one more piece of content that somebody will get. And we have a role as information professionals to actually manage people's information overload. So, hopefully by me taking that snapshot, it summarises some of the challenges and some of the opportunities that Taylor and Francis hopefully can help us solve. So we've got a very, very tight schedule. So I understand now we're going to have a video from the States.
Hi, my name is Alan Cho, and I'm a librarian here at the University of British Columbia Library. Today I want to talk about YouTube and academic libraries, and particularly the tips and tricks of using YouTube and its relevance in academic libraries. So I have a top 3 tips of using YouTube, and I will talk about them one by one. Certainly when we talk about YouTube, I have found that it has increasingly becoming important not only in entertainment, but also in the realm of education. And more I see it as an evolution of a media. And in academic literature, we're seeing more and more of this appearing. Certainly, I think in 2011, Jeffrey Little had written a very interesting article about revolution, about YouTube being a revolution, and how streaming media is becoming an increasingly important part of academic libraries. And I certainly agree with Little. Particularly, he argues that it could be used as instruction, marketing, and also as a shared repository space. And that's certainly how I view academic libraries and YouTube. In fact, some have argued that Netflix in an academic library is a very important part of the collections. And I certainly see this in personal use at home of Netflix and entertainment. But I think we should also take it seriously in terms of how media is being streamed online, and certainly Netflix is one. There's another one called Canopy. And I certainly see from an open access standpoint how powerful YouTube can be in terms of streaming media. And I think that's where the evolution of media is moving towards. It's moving increasingly online, available to all. Certainly YouTube as a learning tool, I think everyone is aware of the Khan Academy. I think Salman Khan was the first to really deliver lectures from his own computer and really made it an awareness tool and made it into a global learning institution. And I think that YouTube as a tool can also serve the same purpose for academic librarians and academic libraries. We're seeing this more and more where librarians are posting their videos online for information literacy awareness and using it as a learning tool. Certainly for my personal experience as an academic librarian, I see it as a powerful tool, not just for showing videos online, but also actually using the platform as a teaching and learning tool, as a research tool as well. Currently I'm working with 2 professors here at UBC and using YouTube as a translation project of English language webcasts into different languages. And we're having students work with us in terms of translating the text provided by YouTube and translating them in different languages. And I think that as a learning tool, YouTube provides this aspect which is very unique and is unlike other streaming media outlets. And certainly I see YouTube as a digital collection. Here at the Irving K. Barber Learning Center, we've had a webcast initiative for almost 10 years now, and over time we've seen an evolution of type of platforms and type of technology that we have housed our digital collections and our videos. We've used Content DM and we've used iTunes as well, but we found that there were barriers in terms of access for students and faculty that wanted to watch these videos. And at times, if you're not glued to your computer, it would be very difficult for users to download entire webcasts, which could be in the hundreds of megabytes to gigabytes of data. And we found that bandwidth is certainly a challenge for those who are not here on campus and are using it perhaps in remote areas. So from our community outreach standpoint, YouTube is a very powerful opportunity to engage those users who are not on campus or are not aware of our digital collections. So from that standpoint, I think YouTube offers academic libraries more awareness for reaching beyond its usual channels. Certainly, if we take a look at YouTube as a digital collection, we would see it as part of a continuum from the silent realm, film reels to digital videos. And certainly we can look at streaming video has a number of advantages over its predecessors, VHS and DVD. I think YouTube is very much part of this continuum, and we shouldn't see it as a disruption of the type of media that we have here on campus. I've written an article in the Journal of Electronic Resources Librarianship in 2013, outlining some of these points that I've made in this presentation. So I encourage you to take a look at them, take a look at the article, and compare and contrast some of these points that I've made. So thank you for listening. My name is Alan Cho, and I'm from UBC Library. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, we won't be having questions after that presentation. And I suggest we have the same model because we've got a lot to get through. If we have time at the very end, we'll have questions. If we don't, then people can have questions over lunch. So if we can now ask Georgina from the University of Cambridge to give her presentation, and she has the fantastic job title of UX librarian, which I think is brilliant, and also really into ethnography, which is another area that would be very interesting to explore. So, Georgina, can you...
Do you want to stand up?
Yeah.
So there was a little bit of conversation going on earlier on Twitter about policies perhaps being a bit counterintuitive to the flexibility and adaptability that we have to have when dealing with new forms of social media. However, I disagreed with that, and I'll explain a bit more why as I go. So if you're starting a social media policy, apart from anything else, don't reinvent the wheel. If you have an existing institutional policy, say for example, because I'm from Cambridge Judge Business School, we have a comms team that look after the whole of the school's communications, but what we do as an information service is very, very different to that. However, we have tapped in a little bit to what they're doing, seeing what they're doing and seeing how we can match up, do things differently, and help them out by facilitating what they're doing as well. So if there is an existing policy, use it. You can look at it and go, no, this is completely wrong, this isn't what we want at all. Scrap it and do your own anyway, but at least you've had that chance to evaluate what is going on elsewhere within your institution. Get your team involved with the process. I know the survey indicated that maybe one person is responsible for social media, but then also there seem to be quite a few people responsible. In our team, we split the responsibilities for maintaining our social media in our normal rota. So someone's on a desk shift, someone's doing inquiries, someone's doing social media for the day. And by getting your team involved with that process of figuring out what are our messages, how do we want to do this, what are we trying to say about ourselves as people and about the service, which I would argue is the people to a degree, by getting them involved in that conversation, you can actually guarantee that your policy is going to be relevant and people are actually going to understand why they're doing social media, what's the point to it all, what part they play, and it also gives them a sense of ownership of this sometimes weird new thing, particularly when people haven't used social media before and are asking, well, why the heck are we doing this? Well, actually, by having those conversations, you can eliminate that as a potential problem later on. And the key bit about flexibility, having it flexible enough that you can adapt quickly and have those different responses depending on the situation, or update your message depending on what platform you're using, is the key bit of having a flexible policy. However, you do need to have an element of structure. You need to, again, understand why we're doing certain things, what messages we're trying to communicate, and who our audiences are, and the type of content that they're going to be interested in. And by having that structure, again, the members of staff who may not have used social media a huge amount or have used it on an incredibly personal level and never in a professional way, have that structure to look back on, double check that they're doing everything in the way they should be doing, and actually have that almost as a freedom and empowerment tool rather than a hindrance. So keeping it flexible, massively important. And one final point is sort of going back to your institutional policy. If you can justify why you're spending your staff time on social media and what the point is, what benchmarking you're doing, and all of the other things that can go into a really solid policy, you can actually justify that to the powers that be that may not get it. And they're like, well, why does a library need a Facebook page or a Twitter account? Who the heck are you all talking to? Well, actually, if you see this part of our policy, you can see why, who, and what we're actually doing, and why we think it's of huge value to communicate with our users and beyond using social media channels. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Georgina. Moving on swiftly, to pick up one of the points that I was making, that social media should be fun, Helen is actually going to tell us how it's going to be fun.
So just a bit of background why I was invited today. I was at one of the focus groups that was mentioned earlier, and we were discussing about how social media is used in libraries. During the focus group, I spoke about how we use social media in various ways to engage with our users. As such, I was invited to attend today. It's just how I work for Manchester Metropolitan University, so in its short form, MMU. So how MMU use social media as a fun and effective tool for engaging with our users. So in sort of the traditional ways, we use social media to inform users of any sort of repair works in the university, any new resources, guides on how to use things. But our social media team like to inject a bit of fun into our social media because we find that a lot of the users we have are generally sort of 18 to 21 and they use social media for fun. They're not going to retweet the library has a new resource to their friends because they don't know how credible that would be to them. So we do have a YouTube account that was mentioned earlier, but that's just for our sort of guides on how to use things. In terms of sort of the fun element we inject, we use Facebook. So last Saturday I checked our stats and we had 394 likes. Our Twitter, we had 1,723 followers, and we've just started to use Pinterest. That's quite low. We've got 9 likes and 35 followers. These stats are increasing sort of every day, but as you can see, Twitter seems to be the one where people are engaging with us or like us. So we've probably had most response to fun messages, and by fun messages I mean messages that mean users can engage with us, so it's not just we have a new resource, they can actually feed back to us. So on my slide we've got a picture of a moose. This was one of the things we put on our social media. So it was Christmas Eve and it was quite quiet, so we had a picture of the moose with mince pies, we had the moose sat on our card catalogue, and then we also had the moose sat at a computer using our discovery service, so sort of an informal way to advertise it. Another example is we've recently consolidated our library site. So one of the social media team found a box of sweets that were unnamed. So he asked our Twitter followers to guess the flavour of the sweet. We had, I think that's the most activity we've had on Twitter. We had favourites, we had retweets, we had comments, and these were from other university libraries, from students, and also from one of the societies, the student union societies. And if you want to have a look at that, that was on around the beginning of August on our Twitter page. I mentioned we have a Pinterest page, so we have the traditional boards, our new resources, we have videos that our library staff have made on how to use things, how to get the most out of the library. We also have a board which is named Cats with Books, so it's just pictures of cats sat with books, reading books, so it allows us to get our personality across. We're not just people sat behind a desk or people that, you know, provide the information. We are approachable people. So the points that I've put on the side, it's important to maintain a balance. So between being fun and formal, so we're not zany characters, there is sort of an element of this is relevant information, whilst adhering to the social media policy set by the university. So not giving any confidential information away, not being reckless, representing the university as a brand, that sort of thing. But we think we can promote resources in a fun way. So we have a resource called Box of Broadcasts, which is an off-air recording and media archive service. So ways that we've used to promote that, we've had, say there's a big show on the night before, we've used the Great British Bake Off, so we've had a picture from the Bake Off. The example I'm going to use is Richard. I don't know if you watch the show, but Richard's a contestant. He'd made eclair stairs to put his eclairs on, so we had that as a picture to show that you can use Bob to find TV shows, and then hopefully our users will go on to Bob and find things that they can use in an academic setting. So this shows that despite being less formal, it's a picture of cakes. It's used to promote one of our resources. So I mentioned the platforms that we have. You can find us on Facebook under MMU Library Services, on Twitter at MMU Library, and on Pinterest, MMU Space Library. Thank you.
Good, thanks, Helen. Moving on, can we now have our next presentation from Roisin Gwyer, who was librarian at the University of Portsmouth. And Roisin and I have known each other for
More years than you want to know about.
And Rasheen is on the editorial board of the new review of academic librarianship published by Taylor Francis, of which I'm the editor. So you're going to talk about student engagement and social media, Rasheen.
This is from a sort of librarian's point of view rather than an on-the-ground point of view, so I don't know any stats about how many likes and things we have. We've been using social media at the University of Portsmouth for quite a long time. Mainly Facebook, Twitter, blogs and YouTube. In fact, we were quite an early adopter in the university and the marketing department came and asked us how to do it, so that was quite good. So I've got 3 main points. One is, quite obvious, but it's a conversation aiming to build a relationship. Although that conversation can sometimes feel a bit one-sided because you're the person making a lot of the input. But I think it's quite important that you think about it, or we think about it as a conversation, rather than teaching, which is quite a lot of what we're doing, even at inquiry desks, sort of mini teaching points. And it's not just information giving, but the idea is to make something that's a bit more two-way. We do use it to solicit feedback and to make small teaching points where that is, an obvious thing to do at that point in time. We used to have a sort of information literacy Friday without badging it as such, but on a Friday a lot of the things that we put out were sort of vague information literacy points. And we've also used it for emergencies. So when we had snow in Portsmouth, which we never, ever, ever have, and the whole city ground to a halt, it was really useful to be able to put messages out that way for students. The library stayed open. The Vice-Chancellor got me out of bed, actually, to open the library. Keeps the library in the minds of students, and I think it shows a dynamic service because the brand is still the book for libraries, and people think of them, I think, even though their experience might be different, I think people think of libraries as sort of never-changing things. So it does show that the service does change. It can also engage those who aren't on campus. We've had a lot of alumni follow our Facebook page and our collaborative partners in different parts of the world. You can also target particular market segments. So we have a research Twitter feed, for instance, and a distance learners Twitter feed. I think it's really important to reply to posts in a timely manner because if it is a conversation, it needs to be more immediate. 5 days hence is not, it's a very slow conversation. And we always talk about your library rather than the library or our library to build some sort of sense of ownership. And lots of people do that now, but we did it early on. And it really struck me when I started reading posts saying your library. Secondly, it is visual and informal. And I think the tone is visual rather than verbal. That can be quite difficult, I think, because a lot of librarians, myself included, are very sort of literate, print-based, verbal sort of people. So it's really important to get the right tone, to be friendly and informal, and to show a human face, but also to be authentic. Me trying to sort of be, down with the kids is not going to work, so it's got to be authentic. Also, we try and use the culture of the social media channel appropriately. So Twitter for very short things, Facebook for pictures and sometimes polls to get feedback, blogs for longer pieces. And we've also made an online suggestions box which sort of uses some of the features of social media. So anybody can pop a suggestion in the suggestion box, but you can also then, other people can reply, so it gets a conversation going about a suggestion. Being visual is really helpful. So if we have a Facebook post with a picture, it tends to get 4 times more engagement than one without. So it's quite, I think, quite significant. And as Graham demonstrated, it's a very visual society now. So Snapchat and things like that are really popular now. There's a lot of competition for screen space out there, so it needs to be useful or interesting enough for people to come back. So we aim for a balance between the serious and the playful. So a serious point with a fun picture or a fun item with a serious underlying message. But sometimes we're light-hearted, very much as Helen was just saying, for the sake of it. And I think the creative and playful aspect is really important. We did start off with some sort of really out-there stuff on a blog we had called Thing of the Day, which was in some article, and it was like named as the most bizarre library website. And we had really strange things on it. But really it was us learning how to use the media. I mean, you know, it wasn't that popular with certain members of staff, but I think it was a really good thing to have gone through to get to where we are now. And finally, and this is me with my management hat, I suppose, it really requires dedicated resources. So it is part of our mainstream work. And we have used interested people across all grades rather than the sort of usual people, if you like. So anybody can join the team and contribute. It's constant, so you saw how often people were using social media from the presentation earlier, and it can't be done half-heartedly. It takes time and resources to do well. So not only reading and writing, but planning. You might want campaigns around different things happening during the academic year. You might want to include local events. So the little Facebook post there was when we very recently refurbished a floor of the library, and we had a sort of 12 days to Christmas campaign, which was 10 days to the opening. So all of those things need to be planned carefully. We use tools such as Hootsuite to build up a bank of things so that if we're really busy, there's always something we can be popping out there. And we do repurpose one message in a number of places. And finally, we have a promotions team in the library, and they work on all aspects of library promotions and marketing. And they do the social media, and they have access to a camera. We've made a small photographic suite and a small video suite in sort of nasty dark corners of the library that we don't use for anything else, so that we can actually sort of make it look reasonably smart and professional. Thank you.
Thank you, Roisin. We're now going to move on to the promotion of social media channels, and can I introduce Alison McNabb from the University of Nottingham, who has 20 years experience plus in academic libraries. I've known Alison for a long time as well, and Alison is also on the editorial board of the new review of academic librarianship, so there is a theme.
This is our main library, Hallward Library at Nottingham, although we have quite a lot, and the back image is students with laptops and gadgets sitting outside the library, and that kind of emphasises, I think, what we're doing. We want to draw students, academics, users to our library services, virtual and physical, but we're also reaching out to them as well, and social media is one of the key ways we do that. When it comes to promoting the different social media channels that we've got, and it's fascinating getting the results of the research, but also watching on Twitter as people, delegates here and outside, are commenting on what they use. Define your core audience. Are you using social media on behalf of a particular library or site or resource or subject area, or are you doing so for the whole service? Some libraries run social media for their whole organisation as well. So who are you aiming it at? Because trying to do one size fits all won't work. So define who you're going for. You may well get a wider audience as well. That can only be a good thing, but stick to your core constituency. Be consistent. If you're going to have an information literacy Friday, if you're going to do a throwback Thursday tweet, and if you've got good library or institutional archives, throwback Thursday with a picture is well worth doing. Be consistent. If you're going to blog a website of the week, make sure you do that. Don't stop doing it in October when it all gets busy if you're in academic libraries. And it's very easy to do that consistency by sitting down and planning, as we've discussed, and by using scheduling tools as well. And that's a way of being consistent at busy times. It's a way of covering absences. Be consistent if you're using your signatures, digital signatures, to promote your social media channels. It's great if you can get everybody in the library doing that, putting your blog, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest accounts at the foot of their signatures. Perhaps a different signature for the ones within your organisation that might be shorter, and possibly a different one outside. If you put an out of the office message on, as I suppose many of us have done here today, does it say follow us on Twitter, check out our blog? So be consistent in the ways that you promote your social media channels. Model good practice. If you find people doing it, follow it. We've talked quite a bit here about being creative already, and that's a great way of utilising your resources and fun. Back in the autumn last year, a lot of people were doing show us your shelfie on Twitter, so a shelf of books, and we had a little bit of interaction on the campus I was working on at that time. It's a great way of doing so, and one that we then continued after that to show off shelfies of new books. I did work with animals, well, staff and students working with animals, so it really helped. Model good practice. I've picked up a lot of pictures from Twitter that some of the users I've interacted with have. Again, working with the vet schools, great. Not just the gory pictures, but lots of cute cats and dogs as well. If I saw a good picture that I thought I could reuse in some way, I'd send them a message and say, may I reuse your picture with due attribution? I've never heard anybody say no, and they always say, yes, why do you ask? And the answer is, we ask because it's right and appropriate that we do so. So modelling good practice in our promotion of social media channels is important as well. Two areas of good practice that I see at the University of Nottingham amongst our academics are the use of vet finals hashtag for our vet school, which started off as a revision aid, but is now actually become international. But on the website, which collates their storifies and so on, they've got a section on being a good digital citizen. So they're using it in a really imaginative way for academic purposes, but they're also talking to students, future professionals, about being aware of the need to be a good digital citizen. One of our Shakespearean scholars as well started using Twitter for a particular module. But again, that's gained interest internationally, which can only enhance his reputation. And we can find that in the library sphere as well. And we've already touched on the importance of measuring and analysing what we can do. That's possible. There's many tools to do that. It does come down to having the time to do so, but there are ways that can help improve that. If you're using a particular digital or photo sharing space, if you're saving all your photographs that you tweet or use on Facebook in a certain space, then you've got that as a resource and you can get the usage statistics from that. Using a URL shortener is a really good way of measuring how many people click through. But you have to bear in mind that not everybody is particularly happy with clicking through to a bit.ly or an owly if they don't know who it's from. Again, that's where, as a library service, you can bring some authority to that. I'm always a bit wary if I see somebody encouraging me to click through and I don't really know who they are. I'll tend not to then. So promotion of the different channels embraces all the other aspects that we've talked about as well, and the future for the social media tools that we don't yet use, that we may not yet know about. Being consistent, being creative, modelling good practice, and then measuring and analysing your reach, and then feeding that back into the service to improve it. And you're going to get a few tweets, blogs, Facebook accounts from your analysis. So become self-circulating.
Thank you, Anthony. The last presentation this morning is from Sally Faith, who is Head of Frontline Planning and Support Services at the University of Sussex Library. Sally is not on the editorial board of the New Review of Academic Leadership, and this is the first time we've met.
It is, isn't it?
So there we go.
Yes.
Sally Faith.
Hi. Well, I've got 5 minutes to tell you what the future of social media is. And the truth is that's about 4 3/4 minutes longer than I'll need, because I don't know. But I've never let something like that stand in the way of me filling a good 5 minutes worth of chatting. So I shall tell you what I do know. I think, in my opinion, that social media is very much like youth slang, isn't it? It's youth speak. As soon as we, the grown-ups, think we've got a handle on it, the youth who are using it will change it immediately. I think that, when I use the word cool, my children immediately start using the word sick. And number 2 daughter looked at me in a slightly pitying fashion the other day and told me that rancid has now reverted to a negative. So I now know my place. And the same is true of social media. My oldest daughter thinks it's rather funny that she has a Facebook account primarily so that I can follow her and feel that I'm part of her world. She actually uses anything but Facebook for anything worth looking at. But there's no getting away from it. Social media is and will continue to be a fundamental tool for communications and marketing. We use it a lot at Sussex. We considered it invaluable. We have well over 5,000 Twitter followers. We use that as our primary form of quick communication with our students. And indeed, when we had a forum meeting with a representative 30 or so people from our students, etc., the other day, they emphasised the fact they still considered that one of the main ways that they wanted to receive information from us in a hurry. When they wake up first thing in the morning and it's a snow day, it's a place they just go straight to, as Roisin said, and find out that we, the library, will be open. Always. What's going to change? Well, I think, personally, that studying number 3 daughter, and you're probably getting the trend here of how I do my market research, number 3 daughter uses primarily visual stuff. Now, Snapchat, Instagram, things like that, it's all about the picture with just a brief caption under it. And that seems to be typical of her generation, to be honest with you. And I think, personally, that actually we'll see more of that. As her generation gets older, she's 14 now, as they get into A-levels and into university, I think they'll take their preferred means of communication with them. And I suspect by the time she gets to university, and yes, she is going, whether she likes it or not, she will find, or we will find, that we need to be communicating with her generation in that kind of visual way. But I also think that audio is very important. I can see a time, I was talking to our technical development guy about this, and he was saying he can see a time in the very near future where he will wake up in the morning and his alarm clock will have been set, automatically, and it will come on, and it will be pre-programmed to check a few Twitter sites, etc., and let him know as he gets dressed of anything important out there. He's not looking at it, it's reading it to him. And he can ask it, is there anything going on at the University of Sussex Library today? Yes, it's a snow day, they're still open, etc. And I think that that's something we need to think of. I think that we are, with Google Glasses, etc., we're reaching a point at which people will want to have this read to them. It's the audiobook equivalent of social media. I think that we would be foolish to properly think that we can predict this. Back to my teenage children analogy, the more we try to predict it, the less they'll go in the direction we're expecting. So I think what we need to do is make sure we are completely ready to react. And that's where the policies that my colleagues were talking about are so very important. We need policies that reflect the format. They need to be open, they need to be flexible, they need to be generic, and they need to be empowering. But they need to be clear and concise. So no pressure. I'll get someone else to write ours. But we do need them, and we need to be watching them carefully to make sure we're using the right things for the right purposes. I think that no sooner is any form of social media here than it will be gone. As I say, Facebook, we have many fewer followers on Facebook than we do on Twitter. And as I said, children are not using it the way they used to. On the other hand, Snapchat and things like that are there. But similarly, people change, don't they? Our students of today who are happily using Twitter and Facebook will graduate, and they will not graduate just from the University of Sussex, but they will graduate from their current social media onto grown-up LinkedIn and things like that, and start being all serious and sensible. And I'm sure, like me, you have a foot in each camp, but I think that's obviously quite important. So my message ultimately is, don't try too hard to predict. Try and look at social media the way that the users do, in a relaxed, open and sensible way. Enjoy it, have fun with it, but don't lose out on the fact that it's absolutely fundamental way of communicating with our library users for the next little while. Okay, thank you.
Can I thank the speakers we've had for sticking to time and actually giving us 5 minutes for questions. I think that there are probably some key issues which have come out this morning. So can I open it up to the room for people if they have got any questions?
I think it's great that social media allows you to inject personality into what you do at your libraries, but how do you ensure you strike a balance between that and making sure that there's regulations and rules in place for all of your staff?
We have a policy. Something I didn't really go into a huge amount of detail because of the time limit, but with our policy, we have a couple of ideas of what we are sort of trying to say, but then we have one sheet of paper that says Twitterables and one that says Facebookables, and it gives examples of the sort of stuff that we post. And I didn't mention fun a huge amount, which I instantly regretted seeing as everyone else was talking about it, but a lot of what we do, we don't actually talk about whether the library's open or closed or if there's a new book in or anything like that. We tend to use it for an information sharing tool. So because we're in a business school, we'll post really interesting links to articles that we think our students would find useful, and we keep it fun, and we do post the slightly wacky ones, but we are also very careful. So if there's a BuzzFeed article that has something a little bit could be culturally tricky, we are an international school, we do take the time to reflect on that, and if in doubt we do ask a colleague just for a second opinion, but we do have examples just to help people along the way, and I think you just get used to it the more you use it. And if you wouldn't post it on your own page, you probably shouldn't be posting it on your library's page. It's a very difficult line to sort of keep to, but yeah.
I was thinking about a certain library Twitter feed that I follow, and when the library director changed, the individual running the Twitter feed had a little bit more scope, and actually their Twitter feed remained very informative but also quite a lighter tone, and I could see a lot more student engagement happening there. But I believe that was coming from director level with someone who was social media aware.
Okay, thank you. Well, keeping the schedule on the road, I'm sure we'll all be around for lunch. Yeah. So any questions, we can raise them over lunch. So can I thank again our panel for a very interesting presentation.
Hi, I'm Tracy Roberts. I'm editorial director for our library and information science journals. And I guess it was in 2008 that we became a sizable publisher in this area. We bought the Hayward Press journals, and most of those were edited out of the States. We had a few journals already that we published in the area. Graham's given a plug for one of them quite a number of times already today. I won't say the title, but you are back again. And what we decided to do was consolidate our publishing out of the States. So since 2008, that portfolio's grown. We've added a number of titles, including those owned by the Australian Library and Information Association. And I think in that time we've learnt an awful lot about this area in terms of the journals we publish. We've learnt about the editors and the authors, and I think also about the needs and the requirements that are very specific to this area. We're collaborative in our approach with our journal editors and with our boards, and I hope, Graham, you'll agree that we have good fun at our board meetings. And that they're lively and that they're stimulating occasions. We certainly find that when we go there. What I'm going to talk about in the 10 minutes we've got now is about how the conversations we've had with editors over those intervening years have resulted in an LIS-specific author pilot project 10 minutes isn't very long. I'm going to talk about the pilot, you know, why we did it, how it came into being, talk about a little bit of feedback, and Graham's also going to give me the editor's perspective.
I mean, what I find fascinating is I've been editors of academic journals and librarianship for about 15 years. I was editor of Health Information Libraries Review for about 8 years, and I've been editor of New Review for about another 6. And I find the world completely different now to when I first started being an editor of a journal being published by an academic publisher. The world's more complex. There's a lot more difficult decisions to be made. But to me, and I think what's fascinating is the open access issue generates a very healthy debate within the library profession. And as an editor of a journal published through a commercial publisher, I feel that very much that I am able to do things with the journal that I would not be able to do if I wasn't working in collaboration. And that's not to say it's sometimes straightforward, but you know, this whole communication process is really important because the world's more difficult, and we've got to try and work together as to how we solve that. So that's my rationale for working with yourselves.
And you enjoy it as well.
Absolutely.
So what is the pilot? Well, we launched it in 2011, 1st of November, and it was a 2-year author rights pilot, specifically in library and information sciences. So what that actually meant was that authors in that subject area contributing to our journals were able to post their peer-reviewed, author-accepted manuscripts to an institutional repository, a subject repository, or onto their personal website immediately upon publication in our academic journals. At the time, our standard embargo for authors publishing in social science, arts and humanities was 18 months. So we waived that embargo, and what it gave LIS authors was immediate green open access. We also asked those authors to sign an exclusive license to publish, so the authors retained copyright. And what we were doing there was responding really to 2 major concerns that editors were telling us about, which with our existing copyright policy, which they believed actually deterred authors from submitting papers to LIS journals we published. And why did we decide to launch it as a pilot? Well, we wanted to be able to respond really quickly to editors' concerns, and a pilot was a good way of doing that. But actually, we did also have some concerns of our own. So, we felt we needed to much better understand the effect of a zero embargo approach. What effect would that have on subscription sales to our journals? And so, the pilot neatly met what our editors were telling us they needed, which was providing them with an approach which would encourage a larger and better pool of papers to the journal. But at the same time, we were able to explore the impact and the sustainability of changing this model and see how sustainable this approach would be in the future.
I mean, it's an obvious statement, but our core business is scholarly communication. Our role is actually to support scholarly communication. So for Taylor and Francis to do this, I think for our sector, to be involved in a pilot, which I think is quite innovative, I think it's quite important because there are some real difficult problems we face in how scholarly communication is changing. And to be honest, the biggest problem I think as a profession we have in scholarly communication is getting people to do it. I don't think librarians write as much as they should for a variety of reasons. And I think it's ironic that we're involved in communication, but we as a profession need to build up our body of knowledge by publishing our research and findings. So these kind of pilots can only help us move down that road a bit more effectively than we're doing at the moment.
Okay, what have we done to assess the impact of the pilot then? The answer is actually quite a lot in the last few years. But I'm going to focus on 3 surveys we undertook in June 2013. 2 of the surveys were to groups of authors, Routledge published authors, and also library and information science professionals who Thomson Reuters were able to provide us with details of. And we also undertook a survey of our own editors. Obviously, the author surveys were the same, the editor survey, the questions, we had additional questions in there, specifically around changes in copy flow and the like. And so what I'm going to do in just the next few slides is give you a few headline outcomes from the surveys. So what you can see from this slide, from the author survey, is obviously that there's very strong support for the principle of authors being able to upload their manuscripts immediately on publication, and that goes across the whole author pool.
And for me, when I've been approaching people to have their papers published, librarians have said, well, they've asked lots of questions about this, and actually it is a deal breaker as to whether they can publish it immediately on their own institutional repository. If I was to say no, I suspect a lot of prospective authors will say, right, I will go perhaps to an open access publisher who is prepared to do that. So it's a really key issue for some authors that have approached, the ability to go straight onto the institutional repository.
As you can see from this slide, the pilot was good news for our editors. It resulted in an increase in authors being willing to publish in our journals, whether they were our own authors or whether they were authors more generally in the community.
I mean, what I've found with this is I don't think it's encouraged more papers to come through, but it's encouraged more people to come onto the editorial board. You know, when I've approached various people who are very influential in the profession, and I've said, will you come on the editorial board? Their initial reaction was, I'm sorry, I feel that ethically I can't do that because of my commitment to open access. When I've talked about what Taylor and Francis are doing, immediately they've said, well, okay, I'll give it a go, as long as this kind of pilot carries on and that we can move publishing and scholarly communication forward in the way that I feel is appropriate. And we have had some very interesting discussions on that about
I'm sure you have.
On the editorial board, some very difficult discussions about these topics.
Yep, and we've tackled the issues.
And we've all been speaking at the end.
Yep. And the following year.
And the following year.
We're a bit disappointed, I think, if you take a look at this slide, that actually, despite launching a pilot, there was not very good awareness amongst any of the groups of authors. So what this meant is we actually had a lot more work to do. I don't know, Graham, whether you want to talk about awareness levels.
I think the penetration of this kind of initiative has been limited. I think people now have very busy professional lives where they're dealing with information coming from all directions. And for many people, this is just another piece of fairly complex information they've got to assess. So I am a bit disappointed that perhaps the awareness of this pilot isn't greater than it is.
But despite that disappointment, we actually had enthusiastic editors who were complimentary about this policy, and there's a nice quote up there. And I think actually what the information we gathered from our editors was that there was certainly evidence of an increase in submissions to our journals and an increase also in the quality of the papers being submitted to our journals.
I mean, I think politically this kind of development makes a lot of sense, because it does help the collaboration. And a really good example is, for the past year, we've been doing an issues analysis of various trends in academic librarianship in conjunction with Taylor and Francis. And Rasheen, for example, has helped on this. We've done a bibliometric analysis of the past, how many years?
So it's 86.
86 of the academic papers published in academic librarianship, to look at what are the trends that are happening previously and how will they impact on how we take it forward. And Taylor and Francis have been able to give us very detailed bibliometric data that we can use to do that. And, you know, if we know what's going to be happening in the future, that can only help us kind of get through it. So it's another example of the collaboration between the two.
So this is my concluding slide. I think in our view, the author and the editor feedback that we got validated the premise really of our pilot and made it worthy of further consideration. Obviously, you know, we were looking at internal measures as well as just polling authors and editors. We were monitoring subscriptions and usage data. But I think because the initial pilot was a 2-year period, it was a relatively short period of time that had elapsed.
And so the data we were looking at there was a lot less conclusive. So what we decided at the end of last year was to extend the pilot for at least a further year. And we learned, lessons about poor levels of awareness. And we put much more effort into promoting the LIS pilot this year. And we're continuing to very carefully sort of review the outcomes of the approach into authors' rights. And what we're trying to do, as Graham's indicated here, is really balance editor and author needs, but we also have to balance them with sustainable publishing models. So very recently, we've actually just taken the decision to extend this pilot into the longer term. The slide up here shows you the LIS pilot and author rights page, so you can find out more information about that if you want to take a look. I hope I've given you a flavour of what the pilot's about. I'll be about at lunch, so if you've got questions or you've got comments, then I hope we can talk further. Thanks very much for listening, and Graham, thank you for taking part.
Thank you all for coming and making this event what it is. Thank you to Jodie and Will, who helped present and prepare all the research and put today together, and to Jenny Ellis, who's about as well, and to Melinda, who's sitting in the front row, who works for TBI Communications, and she had the hard task of pulling together all of our research and making it into the white paper that you have to take away with you today, so thanks for that. Thank you to Tracy and Graham for giving us a flavour of the LIS pilot and maybe inspiring some of you to think about how you could write for one of our library and information science journals, because that research and continued discussion is so important to evolving the library community and evolving scholarly communication. And then double thank you to Graham for chairing the panel today, which I thought was really, really excellent. There was loads of brilliant ideas. And Alan Cho, who isn't here, but we got to hear his voice, he was quite fundamental in helping to put together the white paper as well. He gave so many ideas and so much of his time, so thanks to him. So I'll stop saying thank you now. I just wanted to also round off with some comments about what I feel I've learned today, because I feel even in the short hour and a half we've been talking about social media in the library, there's been some really clear points coming along. I can't tell the future either, Sally, so I don't know what's going to happen next with social media, but there's some really striking things that have come out of today's discussion. Number one, the library has moved. I think whenever I first started working with librarians nearly 10 years ago, a lot of the discussions were about what are we going to do? The users aren't coming to the library anymore. Everything's online, so people don't need to get out of bed to read the journals and stuff. So the librarians were, in some cases, almost panicking about that loss of connection with their users. But hey, we've sorted it all. Social media has fixed that, because you now can talk to people while they're still in their bed in their pajamas reading those journals. They're all there via the tools that social media has given to you. But with the fact that the library has moved, that means your brand has moved as well. So owning that library brand and taking control of it via social media is just as important as how you make the physical library look or your online catalogue look. All of these things about owning your brand also translate into social media. So I think some of the most successful social media ownership of accounts has come from librarians who have really clear policy in place, who plan, who have dedicated resources and have been very good at articulating the needs to the people who pay the bills in their university that resources are needed to make social media work. And with that, they then have control over social customer services. So I know it's Halloween today, and that's probably the most scary aspect of social media to me, how to handle people who make complaints about you and the service that you offer online. So having a good policy behind all of that is fundamental from my point of view. And one of the other things that came out today was your role as librarians in the process of curation of resources, and I hadn't really thought about that before, but you're the experts at how to curate knowledge, how to disseminate it, and how to make people aware of the different services that you have to offer. And using your expertise to curate your presence on social media, it translates really nicely, so it's great that you're able to do that. So 3 top ideas of the day that I'm going to remember after I leave are cats with books. That's absolutely brilliant. Show us your selfie, that was really good as well, and a great idea for a campaign if you're inspired to try it in your library. And then I like the idea of the Twitterables and Facebookables, having those two lists on the go, because sometimes whenever you've got so many other things to do, getting content to put onto your social media account is a bit of a stressful experience. So again, planning, having your Twitterables and Facebookables in place is just a really good way to help manage things. But yeah, thank you to everybody for your input today. I think it's been really useful. And now you can go and eat lunch, which I think is being served outside. Okay, thank you.